And now, without further ado, we will move into the final panel of the day called The Next Generation, How They See Future Opportunities and Challenges. And who better to moderate that conversation than someone who's a member of the next generation, someone who's built her own success and is embracing opportunities and challenges at every step. That moderator is Nicole Verkint, founder of OMX. And Nicole, welcome to the stage.
Thank you, Catherine. It's great to see you, and it's great to be here. And I'm really looking forward to this discussion. We're gonna end the day talking about something positive, talking about the future and all the opportunities that I know women entrepreneurs naturally see and kind of have blinders on to see. So um, I'll just provide a little bit of an overview on my background, introduce the panel, kick it off, and really looking forward to this discussion over the next hour. And that'll take us right to 5. So in terms of my background, I grew up in the manufacturing sector. I was around it, working in it. My first startup was in manufacturing. And I was always frustrated by something and wanted to do something innovative. And went out and decided to start my latest business, OMX, in early 2012. And I remember just being so out of my element, trying to raise capital, meet investors, was selling into very, very traditional sectors in manufacturing, very government heavy, energy, aerospace. And so really struggled on both fronts. First front was raising capital, getting the technology built and getting the company off the ground. We know that still today, almost 10 years later, only 2% of venture capital goes to women-led businesses. So we know that continues to be a challenge. On a few fronts, getting enough women starting businesses that are sort of venture backable, and then also getting that capital to those women leaders. So I really struggled with that personally. And then I know once I went into the market and started selling and attracting customers, I really struggled with just that process of making sales. And I felt it was very old school and really required to kind of be part of that traditional club. So I remember those early days, and actually I met Catherine around then when I was getting started, and she was on, I think it was 2 companies ago. And it was really nice to get together with a community of other women that were doing something similar. And we were able to, exchange notes and talk about what was working and what wasn't, and really be there for each other and take a positive spin to it. So that's the tone and the flavor that I've been insisting that we take on this panel, because you just aren't an entrepreneur unless you're an optimist. I don't think it's remotely possible. And so that's the theme I think we'll talk about today, is the opportunities that are both coming out of this pandemic, the changes that we've seen for women, and digitization, and many things that are going to provide really good opportunities for women entrepreneurs and business leaders. So with that, I think I introduced myself sufficiently. I'm an entrepreneur and angel investor, and that's about it. So I'll turn to Emily. Emily, I'm dying to hear your story. I haven't heard it before. I actually bought your popcorn a month ago at a place. I live in Caledon, and they carry it at Spirit Tree. And I actually said, like, what's the deal with this? And so I'm so excited. I need to hear your story, and we need to meet in person at some point. So if I can turn to you, I'd love to hear your background.
Absolutely. So hi, everyone. My name is Emily O'Brien. I'm the current founder of Comeback Snacks Popcorn Company, which I started in the most unlikely of places, and that was federal prison. But you know what? That wasn't, obviously, my going to prison was never like on the docket growing up, but I had about every job in the book. I got my first job at age 13 and delivering newspapers, and then I dug graves, and then I worked in marketing. And so I always loved exploring new areas. And then eventually fell into some substance abuse problems, dated someone I shouldn't have, trusted someone I shouldn't have, as we all tend to do, and made a mistake of, bring drugs back over the border in 2015, where I was arrested, and 2.5 years later was sentenced to 4 years in prison. And so I think being a drug mule is the only job I haven't been good at. So I do not have the qualifications at all. But when I got to prison, I knew that I could really make something of the situation, because I realized how lucky I was. But also I wasn't going to let it ruin my life, and I wasn't going to let other people's positions or opinions ruin my life. And so that's when I got to prison, I found inspiration by seeing how connected people were over food, and how it brought people together, how it brought out people's creativity, and how it also brought out a lot of anxieties about, what are we going to do after this? And finding employment was always a very scary thing, because, when you come into the workforce, even with any kind of record, you're often just told no. And so I wanted to create a social enterprise where I could employ myself and then also give other people an opportunity to grow and learn as well. So that's what I did, and it's called Comeback Snacks. It started during a Super Bowl party, and we're all eating popcorn, and there's different kinds of flavors, and I was like, this is awesome. And I just wrote it down in my notebook that night in prison, and then in there I started building it from the inside out, and now we are in over 120 stores, I believe. Now we have a national distribution deal with the Neal Brothers, and we do tons of advocacy work for women coming out of incarceration, entrepreneurship in the prison system, and also tackling the larger institutions who make it very, very challenging for people with records who often have lots of entrepreneurial traits. Basically help them get financing or help them break down those bigger barriers. So thank you for having me. And I can't wait to talk about everything, whatever we're going to talk about, everything. Yeah.
We don't have enough time.
I know.
It's an incredible background. It really is. That's really inspiring. I'm sure you hear that all the time. I have to tell the audience that the lemon meringue caramel is definitely the best. It is so good. So yeah, it's a great product. I also like this theme, and we can get into it a bit later, around creating a for-profit business, but then being able to use that for good as well. And it sounds like you're really doing that, which is unbelievable. So
thank you.
Yeah, I'm sure there's lots of mini stories in your background as well.
Yeah.
With that, Catherine, I think I know a bit about your background, but please also love your product as well. So I'm totally eating Emily's popcorn and using Catherine's nylons, which need to get used a lot more for back in the office. But yeah, I'd love to hear a bit more about your background, or everyone else will. And yeah, I don't know how you can cover it all in a few minutes, but go for it.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Nicole. I'm so excited to be here today. So a little bit about me and my journey to starting SheerTex, which is what I'm doing today. And we make the world's first unbreakable tights. So I could hand you a pair of our tights and I could say, try as hard as you possibly could, and you would not be able to get your thumb through them. We've been shipping our product now about 2 years, just over 2 years, but it feels like it's been forever. At this point in time, we operate Canada's largest hosiery factory. We have about 170 employees. We moved from Ontario to Montreal to take over this factory about a year and a half ago. We've raised about 60 million US in venture capital. And prior to jumping into SheerTex, I had absolutely no background in fashion or apparel or textiles. My background was actually in software and startups and more like hard tech connected devices. I met Nicole probably back in 2011, 2012, when I was working on my first venture-backed company, which was a company called ShopLocket, and we made embeddable e-commerce. We helped a lot of people do pre-orders for their products, ultimately sold that to PCH, which is one of the larger manufacturers in the world, based out of Shenzhen and San Francisco, and really had this opportunity to get thrown into the world of hardware and manufacturing, and just fell in love with being able to hold the thing that you make. After selling the company, I started doing some angel investing, realized that quite often I was one of very few women on cap tables investing, and decided to try to get my friends to start doing a little bit more angel investing, which ended up turning into Female Funders, which is an online education platform and events network for women that are interested in getting into angel investing. So if you're interested yourself, go check out Female Funders. I ended up selling that to a venture capital firm here in Canada called Highline Beta. They still run it and still run those programs. And I jumped back into the world of starting my own thing and started SheerTex about 4.5 years ago. The first 2 years were all R&D, every problem you could possibly imagine. Our first samples looked more like cheesecloth than pantyhose. And it was certainly an uphill battle to getting all of our products out the door. And it has been a crazy journey to go from sort of 5 to 170 people over the last year and a half or so, full factory shutdown and restart. And I think this year we'll probably do somewhere around 25 million or 30 million US in sales, and hopefully a hell of a lot more as we take over the hosiery industry. So that's a bit of my background, and happy to dig into any part of it.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. And you've been hugely influential in encouraging more women to do angel investing, which I agree. The more women that are investing, you're going to see more female founders getting supported, and it's got that flywheel effect. But to grow that much during a global pandemic when everybody was staying home is a feat upon itself. And so I don't think that you should downplay that you grew a hosiery business during this time. So absolutely incredible. And fun fact for everybody listening, my puppy was in the first commercial. I can't believe that intro, and he could not rip the nylon.
Most important part of the story.
So there you go. But yeah, a problem that we've all had. I know I've been buying nylons at Shoppers Drug Marts on the way to meetings before. So good on you for that. So I'm going to go to Deborah. The ecosystem of people, it takes a village to raise an entrepreneur. I really believe that. I believe it now so much more than I did when I got started. I look back at all the people that played anything from small to medium to huge roles in the journey and the process. And I know that Emily and Catherine agree with me. And so there's a lot of people that are hugely supportive of the entrepreneurial community, and there's so many things that are needed. So Deborah, if you could introduce yourself and your role, that would be great. And background.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nicole. So excited to be here, especially with Emily and Catherine. Hi, ladies. I am also pretty delighted to be here as invited by the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, because as a product of Chambers of Commerce myself, I was born and raised in Haiti. I came to Montreal, where I'm currently based 16 years ago, and I'm very happy, again, to be part of the discussion with businesswomen. I've been in the fashion. I've also been an entrepreneur for the last, for 8 years. But right now, I'm very happy to be at TD as a regional manager for the Women Entrepreneur segment that we launched 2 years ago. So this is, as you were mentioning, Nicole, this is the ecosystem that's really present to help women entrepreneurs, women-led and women-owned businesses to have success. And also, I smiled when I saw the name of the panel, Next Generation, which gives me a bit of legitimacy to reclaim the word young. But what gives me a lot of legitimacy as well is I am the chair and spokesperson of the Junior Chamber of Commerce of Montreal for the last year and a half. And that also keeps me involved in the ecosystem to help young professionals and also young entrepreneurs from 18 to 40 years old. So I'm really excited to know more about these ladies' successes, and also to give you maybe some data and insights on the status of women entrepreneurship here today in Canada. And if we have enough time, I'm sure we can dig deeper to see if that was also the experience and background of Catherine and Emily, building their companies. So back to you, Nicole.
Let's jump into that. And it sounds like you've started companies as well, and I have too. And so let's jump into that, Deborah. I mean, you're at the forefront now of the ecosystem. Your role, as I understand it, is to grow women entrepreneurs in Canada. What data are you seeing? How is that changing? How has that changed over the last, let's say, a year or two? Where do you see that going? So past, present, future. What information are you getting on the state of women entrepreneurship in Canada?
That's a great question, Nicole. And I think for the last year, of course, none of what we saw the previous years are currently happening. So we've had a few backlogs, I'd say, and a lot of impact. And I think it was mentioned by previous panelists in terms of the impact that the pandemic has had on women in particular, but also women-owned and women-led businesses. And that is very true. Just to give you a few insights, because I know that we don't have a lot of time. In terms of, majority of women-owned businesses, 92% of women-owned SMEs have fewer than 20 employees. So this is an issue, and why it matters because more women are starting small businesses, and this is also why the pandemic has hit them harder, because the pandemic hit smaller businesses harder. And also another thing that's also interesting to know about the status of women today is women-owned businesses are more likely to be in service industries, information and culture industries, accommodation and food services. And also that's data that for me, that speaks highly of where we're at right now. Women entrepreneurs generally have higher education levels and tend to be younger than men entrepreneurs starting their businesses. And last but not least, this is, I think, for all of us connected today to know what we can do in terms of ecosystem and being at the forefront or not in the background of supporting women entrepreneurship is the fact that Canada, our country, doesn't have a startup issue. We do have a skill up issue. And I was very eager learning more about, when you shared your experience, Nicole, about, building capital for your businesses. Catherine shared a bit of, how she raised money for the business. And this is where we see less entrepreneurs, but also less women entrepreneurs in that field. So that we do know we have an issue. And this is why it was important for TD specifically to start a women segment, to start a woman-owned and women-led specific segment, to also contribute to that effort to bring more gender equality in business, in the ecosystem, but also see what we could have in terms of responsibility and input in that conversation and that brainstorming, but most importantly, in those actions to bring more equality in the business field.
Yeah, I hadn't heard it explained that way, that was another reason why women had been hit extra hard during the pandemic, is because I have seen stats around an overwhelming number of women led businesses that are very retail in nature and service based and small businesses. Actually, it's a little uncommon with Emily, Catherine, and I all in tech, and Emily has built a brand that you can really scale. Obviously, Catherine, technology business. And brand. And so we're kind of three outliers in that sense, but the
Don't
number
worry, pantyhose is not an outlier.
No, you're an outlier in that you're not starting one storefront or a service-based business, which is where the data is showing that the vast majority of women entrepreneurs are focused.
That's what impacted them more. Yeah.
And so what is TD doing? Where are you setting your sights on where the support should be, and is that the focus in trying to encourage more women entrepreneurs to be successful in raising capital or getting into STEM related programs, or where's TD focused, or what do you think should be done?
Yeah, for now, I tell you that our reasoning and data behind building the segment was a majority based on the federal government's 2018 budget. When if I take you guys back a few years ago, when it introduced the women entrepreneurship strategy with the goal of doubling the number of women-owned businesses. So this is what we want to know, to create an environment that's safe enough for women to want to start their business and to have also faith in the system to start their businesses. And the objective of the federal government, I think the impulse that they wanted to have on the market was to double that number of women entrepreneurs by 2025. So that was a very fixed, I think, goal. And to add to that, I think some of you may have heard or read those stats already. But for example, I'm just quickly reading, just not to mix those numbers up. According to Industry Canada, advancing women's economic participation in the Canadian economy could add up to $150 billion in GDP by 2026. So this is a clear I'd say, vision of where our country, the ecosystem, and also institutions like TD, that's why we are doing those efforts with the segment to make sure that we are providing, a context that is safe enough for women to start their businesses. And because we already have the privilege of working with clients and helping thousands of women and men move their business forward. So this is why we wanted to make a positive impact with the segment, working with organizations that are already supporting women entrepreneurs, because at the end of the day, we are and will remain a bank, but we can work with organizations in the ecosystem. And that's why we pledge, for example, and I'll leave you with that number. TD has pledged $1 billion to spend by 2030 in organizations supporting women entrepreneurs to make sure that we do provide, apart from the financial products and services, but we do provide resources such as mentorship, coaching, and also, for example, boot camp programs that we're very eager to launch, that we've already launched, but we're eager to launch across the country to make sure that women do find that support, not only to start their company, but also to scale these companies as well.
Great. Thanks for that, Deborah. And I have seen those types of programs rolled out before. Catherine, what do you think needs to be done to support women entrepreneurs at different stages? And what's your advice?
Yeah, well, so this last year has been like obviously so hard for so many companies. What I've really noticed over the last year is even among a bunch of my friends that have businesses, it's very clear people are either in a business that's been accelerated by what's gone on over the course of the last year, or they're in a business that has been severely handicapped. And what I found, at least in my personal network, is that the loudest people tend to be the ones that it's been positively affecting. And sometimes it can be, very much to the mental health talk that just went on. It can be incredibly lonely to be someone that is in the category that was harder hit. And our business certainly fell into that category, particularly in the first 6 months of the pandemic, where we were trying to figure out how we navigate it. We had just come off a very large funding round, which put us in a great position from a cash perspective. But Quebec was one of the only regions in the world that actually shut down manufacturing. So we got completely shut down for about 2.5 or 3 months. We were forced to lay off employees, and luckily we were able to bring them all back. But for me, as an entrepreneur, really getting to this scale stage of a company for the first time, dealing with a real board of directors for the first time, going through this kind of experience was incredibly lonely. And sort of circling back to like, what do I think we need more of? I think ways that we can create more communities for women entrepreneurs to share their experiences at different stages, I think are so powerful. And I think that with the pandemic, so many of those communities got pretty hard shut down, like whether they were communities like this that, in the early months, like just trying to figure out how do people get together? How do they meet? What does this look like? I feel so lucky over the course of the last 4 months. I participated in lots of amazing conversations like this one. But for the first few months of the pandemic, I really struggled to find any outlet or people to connect with. So more recently, I've started trying to share more of my experience online, particularly for other CPG companies, and trying to talk more about what we're going through. I started a weekly series where I talk to entrepreneurs, but for me, that's like probably the biggest thing that I think is missing in Canada is a lot more of this shared experience. I personally taken over like the build stage of the early stage of the company, advantage of so many programs, from the Creative Destruction Lab to Y Combinator. I'm now working with an incubator that's new here in Canada that's focused specifically on e-com companies. I would say to any entrepreneur out there, take advantage of every single program you possibly can. The networks that you're going to build are so valuable. But very much to Deborah's point, I think we really lack support at the scale stage. I also found that as much as there's some incredible opportunities for women entrepreneurs in the early stage, there is this interesting almost glass ceiling of support for entrepreneurs at a certain stage. And I'd say like that's probably where you go from being an entrepreneur to needing to be like a CEO. I found that was a really unsupported territory for me. And it became very clear that it was harder for me to have the same credibility that a male entrepreneur might have had at the same stage in their company. It was pretty easy to get pigeonholed as an inventor or a person to kind of be managed around, and I've had to work really hard against that. And I think there's probably work that we could do in a community setting to try to advance more women further in their companies.
It's just that at every stage of your time as an entrepreneur, you need something different. That's what makes the answer to the question a little challenging. I mean, I usually answer it with, you need early stage capital and you need customers and support selling. But of course, you need all sorts of things. Emily, you have such a unique background, and it sounds like you jumped right into entrepreneurship. So looking at yourself going through that process, and you're going to have more in the future, what do you wish you had, and what do you think that we should consider as a country to create more Emilys?
I was someone that always loved to learn. So I think having specific times for like your own personal joys and hobbies was something that, or just like learning something completely different, was something that always engaged me, like even if I had no idea, right? So when I was building my business, I would always kind of go out to different groups and different sessions, and I would play soccer even though I didn't like soccer. And I try to reframe my mindset, doing things that I didn't used to like, or I thought I didn't like, and like kind of learning to find like a joy or just a learning process from them. And just having that mindset kind of really helped me power through building business, breaking down the barriers, because there's always going to be like difficult challenges, and especially with our kind of company, there's more negativity, like not recently, but like coming out, you often get a lot of negativity. And so I think the more that you can build your own skills and your own networks, that's when you start to build trust and rapport. So I think always having like branches of involvement with other organizations, or just something totally random. I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. And then also when you have your staff, allow them to learn new things. Like I'm incredibly trustworthy of my staff, and I treat them like family. And when this happened and we lost all of our events, like some of those events, they were crucial to them because they've just been out of a really difficult situation, and they just wanted to be heard. So knowing that, I kind of created new roles for them so they could continue to be engaged. So even if it's not something you think they're ready for, just bring them, just try, and see if and make them a part of like a family. Like if anything, we've built the family base more than ever during this past year, because that's when people really needed it the most. So it's like, I'll meet you in the park for a walk, or like, like, do you need anything? Right. So it's like active listening and active compassion, I think, is really important.
But what did you need that you were missing when you started Comeback Snacks in the early years?
The internet. I'm just kidding. I would say I needed more female role models, for sure. Like when I first got into the snack space, it's really it's dominated by men, right? So I'd be going into offices, and it's like often see like a blonde girl going into like a manufacturer, like a popcorn or like snack, and so you kind of have to work those not, I don't want to say work the angles, but like I had a difficult time because they didn't take me seriously, right? And then they just like, oh, this little popcorn girl, whatever. And I was like, no, like I need 20 cases or whatever. And then so it's again, just having female role models. Like I didn't really know who I could talk to about kind of being like almost like sexualized, but not like going too far, but almost it was frustrating. So I didn't really know how to handle it and how to be taken seriously. So, and sometimes when you're young and you're like, I'm bubbly, so sometimes it comes off as that, right? So, so it's like, how do you kind of draw the line to make sure you're still taken seriously, but you can still be yourself? And that's the one thing I really struggled with.
Yeah, my nickname was Bubbles. When I was in high school, I used to try to get that out of me and to stop being so giggly, because same thing. I had the same insecurity about not wanting to I wanted to come across as serious as possible. If you were the Prime Minister of Canada, Emily, and you made this blanket statement that we're going to support more women, like Deborah said, we're going to create all this economic benefit by helping women, what would you do? What would you roll out?
I would actually roll out like a hybrid model. So like support the idea, support the creativity, but also what I struggled with was the numbers. Like I know how to add like up, but like everything else is so complex to me. So I think if we could have funding to support like a grant program that would support, a business accounting for a whole year. Right. I've actually had talks with Scotiabank about this. And so, it's like they'll cover like the numbers part, and then you let the creator create, because that's what they're the best at. So that's something that I think I would definitely do, is have some sort of hybrid model where like the really difficult things, and luckily I have a great business partner, but I did the books for the first like 6 months and it was a disaster. It took like a month to do them when we finally got an accountant, so it's like, okay, where's my talents and skills? And obviously you want to know some about numbers, obviously, because you are the owner, but the more you grow, the more complex things are going to get. And I think that complexity can be a huge challenge. So yeah, I think having that kind of support would be great.
You need a great CFO. It sounds like Deborah's mentorship models are what everyone is saying here and recommending. Catherine, I'm going to just switch back to you quick before we go back to Deborah. On your female funders business was really interesting. I was a part of it. And I like that you were focusing on creating and supporting more venture backable companies. I wonder if you can tell the audience a little bit about how investors distinguish the two. So how they think about a venture backable company versus more of a retail service business. We heard from Deborah that over 90% of women-led businesses are considered small and are considered retail in nature. Hopefully the audience knows what I mean by the difference. But Catherine, if you could maybe just from that lens, from your creating more women investors to back more women-led investable companies, if you could maybe talk through that differentiator and maybe respond to this notion or the question of how do we encourage more scale ups and more venture backable women-led businesses?
So I think like the main distinction probably goes between sort of this like business that can grow really, really, really big or not, right? So, for example, if you are starting a business that is maybe a storefront that could potentially scale to start, serving X number of customers, but it's probably not going to grow much faster than that, it probably isn't venture backable. But if the vision for what you're trying to build is something that, is going to service many geographies, even if it is a storefront, but your plan is to service many, many geographies or to go global, and you're able to actually measure really fast growth rates, whether those are weekly or monthly or annually, it is that process of really, really aggressive growth that a venture capitalist is looking for. So when a venture capitalist invests, they're not looking for a 2-3x on their money. They're probably looking for closer to an 100x, and they're willing to take a really high risk on the fact that your business will fail. And what I've noticed in a lot of conversations, particularly with women founders, is they themselves have often not made the decision as to whether they want to take on another partner. I found that like another investor or have someone externally that they have to answer to. Because the second you bring on an investor, all of a sudden you've probably created, a 5 to 7 year timeline that you're going towards some sort of liquidity event. You've given away some amount of power. And a lot of women that I've spoken to, they got into it for a sense of freedom. They got into it for a sense of control over their life and how they work. And deciding to go venture backed is a huge departure, oftentimes from the reason people get into business. And then you find those that got into it because they want to grow something really big or really fast, or they want to completely change an industry. And those motives tend to be the ones that lead someone to look down the route of venture capital. So probably there's like, how do we get more women coming into business from the beginning with their primary motivator to be to build something big, to build something fast, to build something that is world changing. So there's not even like to speak specifically about women, just Canadians tend to not have that level of ambition when they start something. And how do we build more ambition into our founders? So even just to your question, Nicole, about like if I were prime minister, what would I do? The Canadian government has given.
Yeah, you can be prime minister now. Go for it.
Yeah, they've given so much money, and like BDC, I think, is a good example to venture. And there's a lot of banks, there's a lot of funds that are government supported that are putting money into women, putting money into startups. But what I've noticed is that pretty much none of them ever lead. So they're following funds. And what women more than any other entrepreneur need is someone to lead around, be the first check in at the earliest stage, at the Series A, at the Series B, at the Series C. The hardest thing to do is get the first person to say yes. Once someone has said yes, you have all the money piling on. And at that point, the government money is useless. Private money would have taken up that space. The government didn't need to do it. So I really think that in order to get more women starting, we need to encourage ambition. We need to really be upfront about what you're giving up. If you choose to be venture backed and if you choose to build that style of business, and then we have to be willing to lead. We have to be willing to be their first supporter when no one else believes in them. And Canadian investors and the Canadian government, even more so, are incredibly conservative. And to make that kind of like first check is, the highest risk investment. What I found kind of crazy is most of our Canadian investors that have invested because they thought we were going to get money out of the US. So they felt like they were going to miss out on a Canadian opportunity. And I actually encourage Canadian entrepreneurs to even just talk about going to get US capital, because then Canadian investors will take them seriously. And I think that you have to go through that dance is just kind of crazy.
It's so true. I got 99% of our revenue and financial support from the US. And there's the Shania Twain effect. I don't know if you guys have heard of that, but there's that, that's written in government documents that Shania had to go to the US to get famous before Canadians would listen to her. And so it sounds like what you're saying is a combination of, I loved that you said that women need to basically, it's thinking bigger about creating something faster, creating something that will exit. There has to be an exit for investors. And so it's not necessarily, because the answer I hear a lot is it's all about STEM. And yes, we want to encourage more women into the STEM fields, but we have 3 women on the call, and Deborah, I didn't catch what your businesses were that you were in, but I don't think that we're all STEM. And so you can absolutely create a large business that can scale by not having that background. And so it's really about the mentorship of thinking bigger up front. And then absolutely, maybe it's about pushing some of these fund of funds to lead rounds and take that risk, because it's so true. You get all this support after you don't need it. And then when you need it, there's nobody there. It always feels that way. So Deborah, I'm just going to go to you. We're talking about next gen, as you said. You're the lead for the Junior Chamber of Commerce. This is great. Where do you see the future? Where do you see the opportunity? What's exciting you about the future? I promised the Canadian Chamber of Commerce we were going to end this panel on a high note, get everyone excited coming out of this pandemic. We're going to embrace digitization and learn these lessons and do great things. So where do you see the future, and what are you excited about? And
Great. I'm going to help you deliver on that promise, Nicole. And I think it's very exciting what's coming. But before I give out good news, we do have to acknowledge, and I don't think that's going to surprise anyone, that of course the pandemic has amplified structural barriers for Indigenous, racialized, and other diverse entrepreneurs, most of all. And I know that I speak for some of them, especially for Black communities. But again, we've seen so many actions and decisions and resources put together. But this is a reality. But for young entrepreneurs, specifically in the next generation, what we're seeing, and again, you have to excuse me because I'm only going to highlight one report that was done recently last month in Quebec for entrepreneurs. And what we're seeing right now is the dynamic groups or communities that are, gaining more territory and breaking more barriers in terms of entrepreneurs or women, young people, 13 and younger, and also immigrants. And I'm going to leave you just with one data, not to, give you way too many details. As in 2019, immigrants had the highest intention and procedure rates to start their business. And that number has doubled just in the last year amidst the pandemic. So even though there was COVID-19, this has not, reduced their ambition to become entrepreneurs. And that's very positive, and we should definitely look into that as the ecosystem, as the industry, as we were speaking, and also in terms of venture capitalists, because that's not usually those are not usually the communities where we see a lot of venture caps being available or even being proposed. So I think that we institutions have a real opportunity to be present and also to lead, as Catherine was just saying. That is a major impact. And I've worked in the ecosystem before. I've been an entrepreneurship counselor. That is very true. What you ladies share, even Emily with your story, and also Catherine, that is true. That is a reality. Very few organizations will lead, but we are seeing change, even if the change is not quick enough, but we are seeing change more and more. And even as a bank, I speak for TD today in terms of, I was taking notes while you were sharing your stories. We do have to be present to be able to provide that first support for you to be able to scale those companies. So in terms of positive news, maybe the last positive thing is the sustainable aspect of it, because even though some projects, entrepreneurial projects, were put on hold because of the pandemic, these young women, immigrant entrepreneurs are really looking into ways to have an environmental impact. And that is in my eyes, actually very positive. And at the Junior Chamber of Commerce, we did a study 3 weeks ago. This 40% of our community wants to start a business and have more a bigger impact and sustainable impact. So that's also a result, I'd say, of the pandemic, because before then they had that sensitivity, but it became more clear to them right now that this is what they need to do, and this is what we're going to help them do.
There's so many good points there. Your last point is so spot on, that really excites me, that I see a lot of people saying, let's embrace startups and businesses to solve some of the world's biggest problems. It can't always fall on government programs.
Exactly.
Emily's doing, it sounds like a portion of her profits are going back into support incarcerated people. And so I think that there's so many examples now. And, I do a lot of work in the ESG space, providing data on ESGs. And we're seeing the younger generations demanding it from the companies.
That's a key word.
From the companies they work for and from the companies they buy for. And so we're seeing corporations stepping up and taking that role. And so that's a whole nother topic, but very exciting. So Deborah,
no, it's a good choice of word, Nicole. The men, because we see the younger generation not willing to do a compromise on that, and they're really demanding those numbers. So very great choice of words.
Yeah, and corporations will do it if investors are asking them, employees, they're going to attract the best talent, and their customers are asking them. And so to me, that's a sustainable solution as opposed to government imposed regulation. But Deborah, you're going to be very busy when we get off this call, because you have received the requests for extended mentorship programs, pushing the ecosystem to have VC lead rounds when women-led businesses need it most, providing role models for women. There's a lot of different areas. And I love what you said about immigration. I don't know the numbers on that, but I believe there's been a huge backlog because of COVID. We haven't been taking in the numbers like we were in the past. And I was a part of a few Startup Canada events where I couldn't believe how many people had only been in Canada for a year, and they were there starting up businesses. And so the startup visa program, I am super excited about. So I didn't even think about that point, but that to me is going to be a great thing for Canada. So I'm going to move to Emily, I guess. Emily or Catherine. Emily, if you can provide some of your thoughts on the future of entrepreneurship in Canada, where you see the opportunities, what's exciting you. Guess what? Whether you like it or not, you're now going to be a mentor for other people. So it's your turn already. So if you can speak to that, that would be great.
I think what I see is an openness more specifically about like substance abuse and like past mistakes. Like I think before we lived in this world where we created this like polished resume that was embellished, like hoping like, our other self like wouldn't come out. And now I think what we should ask for as an employer is for people to talk about those things, and for it to be okay, and for it to be like accepted and not, something that you're scared of. Because I think honestly, when you go through really difficult times, it actually makes you more tenacious and stronger and resilient. So if we talk about and embrace those failures and bring them into the workplace, I think we could actually be more progressive as a whole. So like even at Comeback Snacks, for example, like I'm like, you can tell me if you're struggling with like substance abuse. You can have like AA meetings. We just opened up a store. So it's like we have a store with like a little office room, and I'm like, you can have the meetings here. Like just tell me about everything. So I think having a really open dialogue about those kinds of things will actually make people feel more at home and more comfortable, and like they don't have to hide as much, and that way people's anxieties won't be as high, and they won't want to like skip work. Instead, they want to come hang out because they feel safe there. So in my opinion, having a more open-minded and welcoming approach to a wide variety of mental health issues and substance abuse issues is like we're getting there for sure. But I think you still have to lead the way and do it and show that it works and show why it works, and talk about it and talk about that journey.
Yeah, sure. and owning who you really are and in a public way, which is what you're doing. I loved how you talked about how the numbers overwhelmed you, because a lot of entrepreneurs won't admit that in a public setting, but now someone's going to be hearing you say that and they're going to go, oh, thank God, me too. By the way, I was overwhelmed by numbers too. I used the simplest cash flow ever. And so I think all of these things are important to tell your true story and admit that you're flawed. And I don't know if it's you, but I always find that we embrace the flaws in these entrepreneurs after they become billionaires, like Steve Jobs,
Yeah.
but not when they're trying to make it and they're trying to raise money and they're trying to get their first customer. They have to act all perfect. Don't act
I ask people, like, what was your biggest mistake and like, how did you learn? Like, when I came out of incarceration, I actually used my first resume. I made it as a prison resume, and it's all the jobs that I had in prison. And I was like, this is what I learned in here, and this is where I'm coming from, and this is what I'm gonna do after. So it's like, if you just own it, you'd be so, like, shocked at how much people can relate to you more when you talk about how something didn't work out, I guess. So, yeah.
By the way, I used to brag that I shoveled manure before I started my company. And so I could do anything, but you dug graves. So I think you taught me on that. I honestly
to my mortality at a very young rate.
Yeah.
Or young rate.
Right. I completely agree. That is an amazing point about embracing and people talking about their past. And it is so true. Someone who's struggled. There is a stat in a Malcolm Gladwell book about kids who have lost their parents at an early age. They go one direction or the other, and they become uber successful or not. And so it's really amazing that there's some data around that. But Emily, you keep doing what you're doing and keep telling your story, because there are people that are going to be listening to you and going, I have this past and I could never make, oh, wow, but she did it. So good for you.
Yeah, you can only own you are your biggest asset, right? So you have to own your story, or else someone else is going to own it for you. And that's truly the biggest loss of life.
Yeah. And your strengths are actually a function of your weaknesses as well. Like they're together. There's not one or the other. And so I think that's important to recognize. Catherine, no pressure at all. But I mean, you've created a unicorn in the hosiery business during a global pandemic when no one went to work. So I know you can do this. If you can have some final thoughts on future. You also are so plugged into the women entrepreneur community. You started Female Founders, et cetera. So would love your thoughts on the future and what's exciting you and optimism. And
So I think that it might have been Harley from Shopify that said this, but like the world has moved 10 years ahead over the course of even probably the first 4 weeks of the pandemic. Like what was going to take till 2030 is happening right now. And that's everything from technology adoption to adoption of e-commerce to the future of retail. So many industries are moving so quickly. And while that's definitely disruptive, entrepreneurs and new businesses tend to succeed out of these moments of huge disruption. Like 2008 was when some of the biggest companies today were founded and really turned, an economic depression into an opportunity to start. You have this access to incredible talent that maybe they're out of work because of the pandemic that you can access right now. People who are maybe finding themselves underemployed or unemployed are starting to go out and start businesses. And really, I think we're going to look back at this moment in entrepreneurship 2-3 years from now and realize that some of the most incredible new technologies and most incredible new businesses were being founded right now. So I think people can be part of that. What I've also noticed is that sales processes, whether that's selling an investor on your company, selling, B2B sales, even sales to customers, everything is so much shorter right now. It used to be that you would have to spend weeks, or you'd have to go visit someone, or you'd have to fly somewhere. There'd be a whole process, whether it was to getting an investment or maybe a B2B sale. And now with Zoom, as much as it might be painful to be on calls all day, people are so much more efficient. I have a friend who ended up closing their round, I think it was in 2 or 3 weeks, not having to travel anywhere, doing like 8 to 10 partner meetings a day, running through these really, really quickly, because they didn't have to spend a whole day at every single venture capital firm selling someone on the idea. I also think for women in business, people are forced to look at the numbers now. It used to be that you would go in person and maybe someone's biases would come out in terms of how they interpret you or your interaction. And not that that can't happen over Zoom, but people are so much more reliant on making data-driven decisions now that we don't rely quite so much on in-person interaction. And I think that is actually a huge opportunity for female founders, underrepresented communities to get their businesses to the top of the pile, because it's not about how well you can network at an event. It's actually about the business. So there's just so many exciting things I think that are happening right now. And I think that entrepreneurs being opportunists in many ways, I think there's never been more opportunities to really disrupt and change things than there are today.
Perfect. I couldn't have said that better. That's exactly what I was hoping for, just the accelerants that are happening, that we're going to take advantage of. I know that we will. So thank you, everybody. I promised I would wrap up at 5. It's exactly 5. I've had a really enjoyable time. I wish we could continue on. This conversation could literally go on forever.